All right.
All right, go ahead.
Okay. So I guess we were debating about whether like, so what I originally said was, um just to go back. Do you want? Let me just screen share real quick. 1 second. All right, share screen. Okay, all right. Just let me know when you can see my screen.
I can see your screen. You
All
want me to add it?
right. Yeah, sure. Okay. So I guess our debate started when I said that this looks like the beginning of a socialist movement. Let me just see movement. There we go.
Well, you generally agreed with the
Yeah.
sentiment posted at the that I shared, which
Mhm.
was which I am saying is insane, is the idea that churches are next when it comes to these groups taking down statues. And there's somebody posted that churches are next, and I shared that post because I thought it was insane, and your reaction was that it wasn't insane.
I
And
think
this,
it's not outside of the realm of possibility going forward, because like things have progressively gone worse. Like so what me and say Secret were debating about was Trump not long ago said that, yeah, now they're taking down Confederate statues. How long until we start taking down George Washington and Thomas Jefferson's statues? And that's what's happening now. And the fact that like very prominent Black Lives Matter leaders are calling for, yeah, we need to take down all figures of like white Jesus from churches, right? Like it's just problematic, and it shows that there is definitely political will in that movement to be like targeting what they perceive as racist symbolism in churches.
I don't
So
think that there's a general sentiment that churches are perceived as symbolically racist. I don't know where you're getting this from.
um I guess there yeah, so Sean King was saying that the portrayal of Jesus as white, and his white European mother is racist, like if you can see my screen.
I see it.
So like and he's saying that, yeah, like this should all come down, as like as you can see at the bottom, like
Okay.
he is calling for it. So I feel like there, even if it's not a realistic threat at this current moment, there's a credible threat that this may come to it in the future. So I'm just saying that it's we shouldn't dismiss this as nothing. I feel like there is some sort of credence to it for the fact that like prominent leaders among that movement is calling for it.
73% of Americans believe in God. Um,
Hmm.
55% of Democrats attend church. I don't see how you're drawing any. There's just, it's politically impossible what you're talking about. And at any point into the near future, that these individuals are going to want to destroy churches. And it honestly would be like picking a fight. It'd be honestly, like I said earlier, it's like an ant picking a fight with an eagle. You're
Sure.
talking about the strongest, most powerful demographic group in America, which be religious Christian Bible believers. And this group is not going to pick a fight with them. And your post there, um, the comment that you relayed to us is an odd, weird opinion that you do not see very often, and I don't see any indication that that's going to become normal.
Um, so, like, let's put it this way, right? So you said 57% of Democrats go to churches, but the thing is, Democrats are not politically aligned with churches in any way, and I can definitely see a scenario where they start saying that, oh, yeah, portrayal of white Jesus is inherently racist, and those portrayals need to come down, and it needs to change. And I can see movements like that happening, right?
Well, wait a
I
second.
think
What do you?
if
What is just? Let me stop you there. What do you mean they're not politically aligned with churches? What does that mean?
so, in the last 2 decades, for example, what policy did the Democrats come out with that has been supported by the church, as opposed to Republicans who are, say, pro-life? And
Okay, but just because they hold views that are in common with conservative churches doesn't mean that they hold views that are not aligned with any Christian churches, period. The Catholic Church is pretty open about abortion. They have been. A lot of Catholics are
Catholic churches don't endorse abortion.
Catholic
They're,
churches don't, but it's normal for Catholics to, though.
um, so I mean, like, you're shifting. So Catholics can entail many things. Catholics can entail liberals. It can entail conservatives, right? So I mean, I feel like when you're born into a country that has a dominant religion in it, you're born into that religion, and most people say I would say the liberal half of Catholics and the liberal half of any Protestant or any kind of church aren't really into the concept of Christianity. They're not very religious as much as the right tends to be, right?
This is a very long step away from wanting to destroy churches.
Like the thing
From
is,
not being politically enthusiastic about what might. There is no biblical basis for banning abortion anyway. In
sure,
fact,
okay.
in fact, interpretations of the Bible are generally the closest thing the Bible ever comes to it is a mention that if a woman is struck by a man and she miscarries, that the man who strikes her should pay a fine.
Okay.
And so there's a fine, and so there's an implication there that the baby is not a person. I think a lot of religious people, a lot of people who are very adamantly Christian, see things the way I do on that matter, or as I just interpreted them. I know obviously maybe a lot of them other
So
ones don't, but there's nothing implicitly anti-Christian about a pro-life stance.
wait, you mean a pro-choice stance? You
A
mean?
pro-choice stance, I mean.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Sure, but I think that we are getting into a separate discussion here. I don't know enough about like specific Bible verses on this topic to like comment on it. So like I can agree with that, but what I'm trying to say is that in general, right, I think we can both agree that the overall sentiment among all the churches in America would be that they're more likely to be pro-life than pro-choice. The pastors wouldn't be like, I'm sure you're going to find some LGBT pro-LGBT churches here and there saying that, oh yeah, abortion's fine, but most churches in general, I think, would be anti-abortion.
Mhm.
Right? I think we can
Well, I
both
would
agree with
say
that.
clergymen tend to be more of what are called strict interpretationalists of biblical texts, whereas parishioners are a little less likely to be strict. You know,
Okay, but
parishioners don't necessarily agree with the church clergy and everything.
sure, I agree, and there's so many people who are Christian by name, right? Obviously, um, but I think whatever the leaders of a particular group believe, I feel like that carries the most amount of weight with a regard in regards to what that group actually believes in or what that group promotes, right? So if the leaders of the church are against abortion, I think it's safe to say that the church's position or is that they're against abortion, right? So anyway, so the point I was trying to make is that I'm sure there's some people who believe that they're physically gonna burn down churches and stuff. That's not where I was personally coming from. Where I was personally coming from is that it's not inconceivable for me to see that people in the the same people who are toppling statues right now are gonna start calling for taking down of all images of white Jesus, or like all images that they think are problematic in the church, right? And I think that's definitely possible. I don't think they're gonna come and burn down churches, but they're gonna be like holding protests outside churches and putting pressure. It's also conceivable for me to see that they're gonna go after the tax exempt status of churches in the future. And like I don't necessarily agree with that personally, or I don't have a strong stance on it. But I'm just saying that churches, it's not ridiculous to suggest that churches would be next in terms of protests. That's the point I was trying to make.
Based upon the fact that clergy members are pro-life and parishioners are not, is a very long step from saying those parishioners want to burn down the church.
No, I don't think
I can
I don't think those
understand,
two are related. It's not necessarily about the pro life stance. Um,
but
I don't
okay,
think.
I understand you're just using
Yeah.
that as an example among several that where there are social views taken by the church that liberals in general perhaps don't take.
Okay, sure. And also, like I said, what Sean King was saying was that these portrayals of why Jesus is racist and these should all come down. And as a leader of, like, a prominent leader in that movement, I think his words carry a lot of weight. So there is a semi credible threat there. Like, I don't think he or no one else, no one's calling for the burning down of churches. I don't think that's what you said is true. It's probably not going to happen, like in our lifetimes maybe, but the fact that churches will be the target of, like, maybe I don't know what the right word is, maybe censorship, like they're going to call for these things to come down, these images to come down that they perceive as hateful or problematic, because I'm sure churches do carry a lot of imagery that shows the white man as being the superior, like, being, or like, showing the white man on the forefront of things. And I can definitely see a lot of people having problems with that and petitioning these things to come down in a very forceful way.
How would they petition, though? Who would they petition to?
They would protest outside churches. They're gonna, like, they're gonna harass people going in and out of the churches. This is what they always do.
Well, this is unprecedented. It's never happened in America. There's never been any kind of protest outside of churches.
Okay, I mean, it's also unprecedented that George Washington statues are coming down. Like, things are moving in unprecedented direction, right?
I don't think it would be tolerated for people to protest outside of churches. I think that people generally in America think that there's a sacred. I don't have an objection to people protesting outside of churches. I think it should happen actually all the time. But based upon what the minister says, I mean, we protest outside of TV shows being produced by a guy who says controversial things. If a minister says something retarded, then it ain't much of a, why give him an exception? But I think in general, Americans have an idea that churches should be accepted from that kind of thing.
So I don't necessarily agree with you that it won't be tolerated, because I mean, like, what's legally going to stop them from doing all these things? As long as they're not breaking laws, I think it would be fine. And if it's done under the ruse of a riot, right? Say the church in front of the White House. I forget the name. That was, like, someone set fire to that. I mean, they put it out, but
They didn't target it intentionally because it's a religious institution.
you don't know that though.
But they targeted all. They burning stores down. I mean, the stores didn't. I don't think they
Sure.
targeted those
But
intentionally.
can't you conceive of an Antifa member saying, "Yeah, let's set fire to the church"? I can see that happening.
A
Right?
person doing that, I don't know. I mean,
Okay,
maybe
yeah.
a person.
Of a person doing it, I can't generalize that to everyone. All I'm saying is that there's a credible threat that it may happen in the future, right? I mean, I guess
Well, okay,
that's
what was the media
fun.
reaction to that church being burned down? Did they
The
treat that the same? Let me ask you. They
yeah.
treat that the same as they did a store being burned down? I'd say that they treated it as far more serious.
Sure, but it's all relative, right? The news regarding the church wasn't as much as the church burning, as it was more of, oh yeah, Trump. It was like close to curfew time, and Trump had his like troops come and, like, throw tear gas at the protesters and made them disperse. So the news was surrounding that.
That was
Um,
afterward, though. That was a different story. That's a story after the fact.
but
The church
okay,
was already known to have been a target of being burned down before Trump went over there and gave a speech. And it was known because it's considered generally in America a much worse thing to burn a church than it would be to burn a store or even a school or even a hospital or something like that. I think generally in America we tend to hold churches as pretty sacred. Even individuals who aren't religious tend to.
So I personally don't know what the media response was in regards to the church burn down, because the only news I heard about it was about regarding Trump. So I'll take your word for it, because it makes sense to me that the media would have a harsher condemnation of the church burning than stores burning. I would say that it's probably Fox News who did the condemnation rather than CNN or MSNBC, who had literally had a video of, like, stores burning behind them, and they were like, oh, these protests are peaceful, let's, like, they were more interested in conveying that these protests were peaceful than the riots. I mean, that's a whole other story. I do support the protest and everything, I don't support the riots, but all I'm saying is that the quote unquote liberal media worked overtime to make sure that they were making sure that the protests weren't being criticized in public. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know if CNN and MSNBC did condemn the church burning as much as we would think they would.
Okay, well, here's a post from
Um,
CNN
uh-huh.
specifically on the topic of the church being burnt. Let me see just a second. Chrome tab. There we go. Okay, back to here. And share my screen. There we go. Okay, so West Virginia church burns down. This is on CNN.com, so it was reported on CNN. It says not a single Bible was touched by the flames.
Mhm.
And it shows a bunch of Bibles there that weren't burnt in the fire. It's actually very hard to burn a Bible. That's why they tend not to burn in fires. But it's just the way they're built, they're put together.
Huh?
But the so this is a report by CNN, and it's prior Donald Trump's visit to the church was after this is March 5th. So
Okay, I see, but do you see that there's no condemnation here? It's just very factual reporting, right?
well, there's a condemnation. Why report it? I mean,
Wait, what was the headline? I mean,
okay.
it's
Well, let me.
something. Yeah, go on.
Okay, I'll go through and I'll show it again when I find it. You can go ahead and talk if you want to,
Okay.
but I'll.
No, but your point was that there would be a stronger media reaction to a church burning down. That wasn't a very strong reaction. That was a very neutral reaction. It was just like when CNN reported about Target being looted by the protesters at the very beginning of the George Floyd, protests. So I shouldn't say protesters, Target being looted by the rioters. It was very neutral. So I don't know. I don't know if there is the political will to not tolerate targeting churches. I don't know if it exists overall in America, at least in blue states, I would say. Um, anyway, we can agree to disagree on that. Like we went off topic. I mean, it's not off topic. It is kind of relevant, but obviously to our or initial discussion. But anyway, so the when things got heated was when I made the statement that communists are more likely to be toppling statues than the average U.S. citizen, right? And you said that was a
No,
fallacy.
I don't. I don't hold that view.
No, I didn't say you hold that view. I just said that that's what I said, and
They
you had a
toppled.
problem.
They toppled Stalin statues, and those were by communists. They toppled Saddam Hussein's statue.
Sure, they're still toppling statues, right?
Yeah, but those weren't communists, though. Communists didn't topple
Okay.
Stalin's Saddam Hussein's statue.
So I'm comparing U.S. communists to the average U.S. citizen, right? And so let's. So the thing is, like Tim said, yeah, we can look at what demographic takes the biggest, poop, and there's no study on it, so I can't literally show you a study showing that communists are more likely to topple statues. But let's use our intuition to see if they are more likely. Like, do you think communists are more likely to topple statues than Republicans?
No,
You don't think so? Okay,
because basically communists tend to be liberals, and statues are from the past. They usually iconize past individuals, and liberals tend to be anti-tradition. So most statues tend to be anti-tradition, and most statues tend to be of traditional figures.
Okay. So
if we had statues all over the place so
they have more incentive to topple statues.
If we had statues all over America of Charles Darwin, I don't doubt that a lot of liberal conservatives would be wanting to topple them.
Sure, but in reality, it's not happening. It's not happening.
We don't have
right as much as sure.
We don't have statues all over the place.
That's a hypothetical, right? But that's a hypothetical
because we don't have them. We don't have statues of Charles Darwin all over America.
Sure, but it doesn't matter. Like, I'm talking about what's actually happening in reality. I mean, yes. Sure. I grant
the reason I'm saying that statues tend to be toppled by liberals, because statues tend to iconize individuals who have who are part of tradition, and tradition, and liberals tend to be against traditional views. That's what makes them liberal or progressive. They're for a new kind of way of seeing society, and that's going to have them being against traditional things.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with your rationale for why they do it, right? But what I'm saying is that in the absence of evidence, um, I agree with you intuitively. I can see that conservatives would go topple Charles Darwin statues, right? But in the absence of that happening, we it's safe to say that liberals are more likely to topple statues than conservative, because that's what's happening in reality, statistically, right?
Okay.
So
But
yeah.
but
So
I want you to explain that to me politically. What is the connection? And
uh-huh.
this is where we get into the topic that prompted you to want to debate me.
Mhm.
What is the intrinsic connection or the ideological connection between wanting to destroy statues of slaveholders
Mhm.
and social democracy or socialism?
So there necessarily isn't an ideological connection, and that was never my point. From the very beginning, I can see why when I said this is the beginning of a socialist movement. I can see why you would think that I'm trying to make an ideological connection. But immediately after you challenged me on that, I clarified several times, saying that, oh no, I'm not talking about the ideology itself. I'm not talking about theory. I'm talking about in practice about the people who self-identify as communists, right? I'm
Okay.
talking about the people who identify as communists. They are more likely to do these things, there's while there's no ideological imperative for them to do it, there's definitely um, there's definitely things in the ideology that would lead to them toppling statues, right? Because um, at least not in terms of Karl Marx, but in terms of like Communist Party leaders, the thought leaders of today, they're more likely to say, "Oh yeah, we need to censor like hateful speech because it's a form of violence." Right? These leaders are more likely to say these things, which is why we see that happening in practice as well, right? And historically, that has been true as well. Um, like the USSR, the Communist Party in China, like they burned down books, they like toppled statues, they censored speech, like at unprecedented levels, right? So like historically I would be right if I say that communists do tend to censor speech, including toppling of statues, than like other groups. I mean,
Okay.
maybe if I go into world history, it's gonna get complicated, so let's just stick to the US.
Right.
um
I see absolutely no ideological connection between the political views or the social views of the Bolsheviks and those in America who are for social democracy. And I also would say that Hugo Chavez was an adamant Catholic. He did a lot for the Catholic Church in his country. And it's not implicit that anybody who has a favor of that system is going to have a problem with religion.
yeah, but the debate shifted onto like statues and censoring speech at that point. Like we stopped talking about the religion aspect, right? All
Well,
I'm saying is,
I don't see any connection whatsoever with toppling statues of racists and hating
Mhm.
religion.
Sure. I mean, we moved on. If from my perspective, we moved on to a different topic. Like we left the religion topic and we started talking about speech, because you had a problem with me saying that communists are more likely to topple statues, and you said that I was using a fallacy, which I don't think I was. I was making a generalization about the group of people who identify as communists.
I'd have to see the context of what I was responding to. I was calling a fallacy. I
Okay.
think it was a specific remark.
I mean,
I'm not
I
going to
do
just
want
repeat
to.
the same things here just because I said them before.
Okay. I mean, I do want to hash that out. So, like, I mean, if you want to just take a look at your specific comment on the thread.
Sure, I'll add it to the stream and I'll.
Sure.
Okay, you're on the page right now. From this page though, because I'm in what's called the edit page or the master
Hmm.
page.
Hmm.
That screen is too far. The text is too far away for me to see it.
Okay. Do you think it's better if you do it, or?
Well, I just made the screen bigger. I'll look closely. Um, Let's see the comment that I'm specifically responding to.
Sure. So, sorry, one second. Okay. So you asked me, what does an economic system have to do with racial activism, right? In response to my comments about, oh, this is the beginning of this looks like a beginning of a socialist movement or communist movement, right? So anyway, this one, we talked about how it's more than just economic system, but over here, I said that in case I'm missing your point, I'm fully aware that in theory, communism or socialism doesn't necessarily require the toppling of problematic statues. But in practice, the actual people who identify as communists are overwhelmingly in favor of Stalinist practices of removing or destroying all symbolisms of whatever they think represents oppression.
Okay.
Right.
If they're ideologically connected to those individuals and to that civic movement, but these people aren't.
But the thing is, so who are the actual people toppling the statues now? I mean, like from our general gauge of our perspectives, it seems like it's Black Lives Matter doing it, it's Antifa doing it, right? Mostly they're the ones who are like toppling these statues. So, and the thing is, if you Black Lives Matter, I don't know enough about their actual political beliefs, but I know that Antifa is mostly heavily communist and socialist, right? So
No, I don't know that. I don't know that they're communist in the way that you are using the word.
Well, they're communists, they're anarchists, they're socialists.
Okay.
Primarily these three things. They're not the average
wait a
liberal.
second. Just a discussion of these terms. Communism could be used in reference to the Communist Party, or it could be used in reference to the system of communism, which is actually an economic system where there is no money. Or it could be reference or just a word people are using for people who are not they don't want capitalism. They want maybe social democracy in the form of healthcare and university education.
Okay,
and so usually that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about people who want universities paid for and they want healthcare paid for. That's a very far
sure. That's the average liberal. But these activists on the street causing violence, they're a lot more extreme than the average liberal. And the thing is, whenever you see these Antifa gatherings, they're always flying the USSR flag, right? So I would assume that they're the state capitalist type of communist of the Stalinist Maoist flavor, right? That I think that's a pretty a safe assumption to make based on the flags they're flying and the kind of things they're doing to suppress speech. So I was pretty clear that I'm talking about the people who identify as communists. They're more likely to be the ones topping these statues rather than the normal average American, right? And you didn't understand what I was talking about, and you still thought that I was talking about the ideology of communism itself. But I wasn't talking about that. I was talking about the people.
But that isn't where I gave the lecture about the fallacy. I think that's further up.
Yeah, sure. Let's see. Oh, okay, there we go. So, what I said was that if you polled 100 self-identified communists in the USA, do you agree that the vast majority of them would be in favor of toppling problematic statues, right? And you said that it's a hypothetical A, and B, that it's a fallacy of composition to say that because a certain group of people advocate for both X and Z are ideologically linked. But I wasn't saying that they're ideologically linked. I was saying that these people tend to be doing it. And fallacy of composition, from my understanding, is that if you see one person, if you anecdotally see that a few people doing something, you're broadly generalizing that every one of these people would do it. I didn't say that all communists want to topple statues. I said that communists are more likely than the average U.S. citizen or average U.S. public to be, engaged in activities such as toppling statues, right?
Well, a fallacy of composition specifically is what I was bringing up is born of a fallacy. Specifically, it's like saying that a plane can fly and a plane has jet fuel, therefore a jet fuel can fly. That's specifically what a fallacy of composition example one is.
Do you think?
But
do you think
what I'm relating it though is because a person holds this view and this view, therefore all of his views are related to each individual view. So if he has a problem with statues and he has a problem with and he's pro-socialist, this means that socialism is connected to the statue removal, and it's not connected in any way
Okay.
except for the fact that that individual has both views.
Sure. So I would agree. That's a fair point. If I was saying that socialism is the one that, socialism is what's causing these things to happen, but that wasn't my point. I was saying that these people, like I was trying to blame the people who identify as socialists. So my subject was the people, not socialism, right?
But you could view them, and am taking the position here that you do view them as linked, just because you don't think they're caused by each other. I think that you think that they're both caused by the same thing. One isn't causing the other, but they have an effect relationship, and that each are caused by a mentality at the root of each of them.
And I, but do you, but okay, so historically, right, we've consistently seen that socialist and communist movements are in favor of stifling speech, right? So clearly there is some ideological connection at the root of it somewhere.
Okay.
But I'm not saying it's directly advocating for it,
Okay.
but
Just still discussing these terms. Socialism is not a system.
Sure.
Socialism is a strategy or an element of some systems. So what I would say is actually typical of the American socialists, people that might use that word socialists, is that they're socialists because they're against the sort of they don't want money or profit involved in things like medicine and university training. Whereas I would say that the sort of socialism that existed in the USSR or China was rooted in an aristocratic sense, where they didn't want the general public making their own choices. So that kind of aristocratic socialism, though it might show some parallels between a more socialism that simply exists to end profit being involved in vital services to human beings, might show some parallels in how it's practiced. It has a different mentality behind it.
Okay.
So,
I agree with that, but what you're describing as the American socialist is actually the American liberal, right? Tends to be on the more to the left of centrist liberals,
sure.
right? So I personally wouldn't define them as socialists, and I don't think they would call themselves socialists. Like people who want universal healthcare, I don't think they would call themselves socialists. They would call themselves democratic socialists, right? But I don't see them calling themselves socialists. So I'm just talking about people who actually say, I want socialism, I want communism, right? I'm talking about those people specifically.
They're a tiny ineffectual group that doesn't have much clout.
Yeah, but then they also burn down like shops and they lay bricks on streets for people to riot with. So, like they are causing enough.
I don't know how much those specific people have been involved in the riots. But
yeah, sure. I don't have hard information.
Petitions to local governments to take down statues of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, or for universities to do so. That requires kind of a strong liberal base and not just an extremist base. So I think that the people doing that are a little more of a general public.
I don't know if you, like, obviously since we don't have numbers, we can only go by what we know. And from my understanding, you're a liberal. Like, did you at any point consider going on the street and looting and toppling statues? I don't think you did.
I'm a progressive, but it isn't because I'm less progressive than anybody else. Though I'm probably more progressive than a lot of these people are, but I'm not an authoritarian leftist, which is a totally different thing. I don't favor taking down any statues, even the Southern Civil War leaders. I don't favor. I'm totally against Roseanne Barr getting fired for making some stupid comment and all that kind of shit. I'm totally against that stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And I always appreciated that about you, for sure.
But because I don't really see a connection between those two things. Between me wanting universal or single payer healthcare and wanting to censor someone who says something racist or getting fired from their job, I don't really see a connection between those two things. In fact, I see them as opposed in the way I view the world.
Sure. That's fine. No problems with what you just said. So anyway, I think going back to this, right? So I guess the initial point was that um, I guess what I was trying to say here is that this looks like the beginning of a socialist and communist movement, and the implication I was making was that these people are slowly growing in power, and once they have this power, we're gonna see things getting a lot worse in terms of speech, in terms of like like in terms of like destruction of traditionalism, right? So that's the implication I was trying to make. I wasn't necessarily talking about social. Like, can we both agree that it's pretty clear that I'm not talking about socialism or communism as a theory. I'm talking about a group of people taking power that identify as communists, right? And these group of people are more likely to be toppling statues because they're the authoritarian left, as you put it, compared to the average U.S. public, right? Can we both agree on these things?
Okay, I would agree that the authoritarian left has more power, or has become actually more radical than they used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I would agree that the authoritarian left wants to take down statues. But what I don't agree about is, and what starts this discussion is that they're going to turn to churches next.
Okay.
Or at any point.
So let's okay. I'm definitely gonna address this later on, right? I just want to get this fast thing out of the way first, right? So, but do you agree that I wasn't talking about I wasn't linking the idea of communism itself to statue toppling? I was talking about a group of people that identify as communists who are more likely to topple statues. Can you agree with that?
Well, I thought we just agreed a little bit ago that they don't identify as communists. They identify as socialists. I mean, you said that yourself. Okay.
Okay.
Well,
Sure. I'm using that interchangeably. So can we both like agree on that? That I wasn't talking about the idea itself. I'm talking about the group of people, right?
I agree that you're talking about the group of people.
Okay. Sure. So I just wanted to say that. So do you think that was fallacious of me to like make a generalization about these group of people?
I think your earlier comment before what I responded to, the specific one, made that a little less clear. And so I take that back, calling that a fallacy, which is fine. I mean, I don't respond to what you've said. I respond to what you're saying. It doesn't really matter whether or not you're guilty of fallacies or not. I don't care.
Okay.
I only care whether you're making sense right now.
Yeah. So like I'm just frankly speaking like that. It kind of upset me because I felt like you like the thing is I do get heated with people every now and then when I feel like they're arguing in bad faith. I don't think you were arguing in bad faith, but it did kind of piss me off when you unnecessarily like made it like like a little bit personal, like going like, oh, uh I'm not gonna talk to someone who doesn't understand fallacies, right? Like over here, like it would be like debating an animal.
Well, you
right?
did,
Like,
but you did say after I
uh-huh,
explained that fallacy to you
uh-huh.
that there is implicitly a connection between sex and driving a car because
I didn't
adults
actually
do
say
both.
that.
I thought you
Um,
did say that.
yeah, but like, see, what I actually did say, right? When you made that thing, I said if you're an adult, you're more likely than non-adults to drive a car, and have sex, right? Um, so I'm relating adults to non-adults that they're independently more likely to drive a car and have sex. But I wasn't actually relating the concept of driving a car and sex in and of itself, right?
Could you put my comment back on where I said that? I think
Sure,
I specified ideologically linked was the
sure.
words I used.
Okay. It's a fallacy of composition to say that a certain group of people advocate for both X and Z, and therefore X and Z are ideologically linked. Driving a car is not similar to having sex because adults do both things, right? That was your point. So
And
thing is,
ideologically linked, okay?
uh,
And
yep.
then you're saying, and then you're now what was your answer to that?
Okay. So just to clarify, I should have mentioned that's not my point. My point was like, okay, let me just say this. If you're an adult, what I said in response was that I was actually correcting what you said. Like from my point of view, that's not what I'm viewing it as. I'm viewing it as if you're an adult, you're more likely than non-adults to drive a car and have sex. Like I meant them as independently of each other. Similarly, if you're a modern day communist, you're more likely than the average public to want racial justice and advocate for the removal of problematic statues.
But given that I
Um,
used the word ideologically linked prior to
uh
my example, without you clarifying
So
that that was a difference, don't you see how I would see how you were agreeing that how you were disputing my that point in saying they are ideologically linked? You didn't use the
okay,
word
so
ideologically linked.
I did a pure sorry, I did a poor, like, I didn't do a good job of separating what you were saying to what I was actually saying, right?
Mhm.
I want to say that no, I'm not making a judgment call on an ideological link between communism and statue toppling, right? But I briefly mentioned it. It wasn't a very good job, but I said that just because communist theory does not require destruction of oppressive symbolism doesn't mean that actual people who identify as communists that don't do it in practice, right? So this is the point I'm trying to make. So I'm trying to say that no, the ideology isn't relevant here. Ideological link isn't relevant here because I'm talking about the actual adult who, like, has drives a car and has sex, and they're more likely to do both. Similarly, a person who identifies as a communist today is more likely than the average public to want racial justice and remove problematic statues, right? So I did a poor job, and I can see why you thought that. But yeah, like but
Okay, so
I feel like if you
but
were,
here's
yeah,
my reaction to all that.
sure,
You're perfectly fine to correct me on what I'm saying said during our text discussions, which is fine.
uh-huh.
To me, that's what it was, and this is what this is. But I think the implication that churches are next
Uh-huh.
implies the fallacy that I was criticizing you of, and you did say initial agreement with that churches would be next, and I don't see how that at all is possible. And relating to a previous point you made that I didn't elaborate on or debunk, church statues are being taken down on government property.
Mm-hmm.
There are universities, whereas churches by law are not on government property. Churches are external to the government. They're not being funded by the government, whereas universities are. And so the public outcry for churches to do things like take down a white Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
which you'd have to do in like 90% of the churches out there have a white Jesus somewhere, I'm sure. That I don't see that as happening where they can protest every single church in America that has a white Jesus. And honestly, protesting a church is just not smart in this country, given the sheer amount of people that go to church and find the idea of disrupting a church service blasphemous. I just don't see that as happening.
Okay, sure. Um, so first of all, yeah, like I can agree to disagree on that. I think I'm speculating that it's going to move in that direction. But what you said, I can't, I don't have any substance to actually say, no, you're wrong. What you said does hold weight in some places, in other places it won't. I'm sure that in a very blue state, even though Democrats are more likely to be Christian, right? At least, like by name, I think they would allow, like protesters to, like, disrupt service if, they think that, oh, this clergyman is racist or something. Like, I can see that. You might disagree. We can agree to disagree on this.
I think in that
Um,
situation, maybe if the minister said something really racist, but I don't know if they get to the point just because they have a white Jesus in the church that they do that. But even if they did, that's the Jesus. That's not the church itself. That's not the same thing as saying they're taking down the church. They want the church taken down or the
sure.
church destroyed.
So
My
the Sean King example was just supporting evidence of what I mean. That, like, it is credible that churches would be targeted next. But it could happen in many
targeted
forms.
targeted for being removed or taken down. No, that's a
Yeah,
little
you can go
wacky.
ahead. Yeah, yeah, go ahead. You can answer that if you want.
No, I'm answering
Okay.
it's my
Okay.
girlfriend.
Okay. Okay. So, sorry, you
So,
were what
so
your point
just to
was?
clarify,
Uh-huh.
as per my initial post was a sharing of a comment that I
Mhm.
said was crazy,
Yeah.
or an indication of paranoia on the right, was that the statue of George Washington being taken down or Thomas Jefferson being taken down. Therefore, churches are next, or be wary that churches are next. Do you agree or not disagree that that is a paranoid, insane comment?
It's technically a slippery slope, but given how we've progressed on unprecedented levels over the past, few years, from what was like we are now way outside of the Overton window that we used to be in the past, in terms of toppling statues, in terms of having people getting fired from their jobs for saying something. We never used to have that before. So the way things are progressing, from my perspective and the perspective of a lot of conservatives, is that this isn't far outside the realm of possibility. Right now, as it stands, there's no substantial evidence that churches would be targeted to that level right now. But it's not difficult for me to see that it could happen in the near future. So that's where I was coming from.
I I don't
And
see the near future. I don't know if you're talking about 200 years from now. I don't know. I don't see anything in the landscape that suggests that churches are going to be targeted to be actually taken down like statues are.
yeah, but like I said, I don't actually mean churches would be demolished. I'm talking about many forms of censorship in relation to the church. Like, oh, this priest said something very racist. We're not gonna let him speak, right? I can definitely see that happening in the near future, which is not happening right now. Um,
But how
and
I don't know how they could not let him speak. I don't know what that means. I mean, there
they're
could.
gonna protest. They're gonna disrupt the service until he's forced to resign or something.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Um,
I would
but
be very
anyway, like
much against that,
all I'm saying is that I wouldn't call it insane.
but I
There's
don't think
some
that
cases.
post meant that. I don't think the
Oh, the
post I
Sean King
shared.
post. Okay, New
I
York
don't think
post.
the post I shared that I
Okay.
was calling crazy, where it says churches are next, was
Hmm.
implying the taking of the church down. Don't you? I would say, do you agree that was implying taking the church down itself and not
Um,
just protesting outside the church?
so I can see why many people would think that. Maybe even the majority would think that. My personal take on that was that churches will be targeted next by the anti-free speech crowd. Right? That's my personal interpretation, and I'm sure many people see that way too. But I can see why, if you took it more literally than I did, then I can definitely see why you would think that, yeah, they're actually talking about the physical demolition of churches. I can see that.
And would you agree that that stance that they're going to demolish churches
Mhm.
is paranoid
Sure,
lunacy?
sure,
Okay,
I agree. Yeah.
then we're in
If
agreement.
you, if you no if you interpret it that way, right? But if you interpret it in the way I said, that they're gonna disrupt service because some priest said something racist one time, right? If you interpret it that way, then it's not outside the realm of
Right,
possibility.
because there's an ideological connection between a minister saying something racist and a statue of Thomas Jefferson.
So if you read into it, like, from what I'm saying, is that, do you think they're only gonna stop at like censorship of speech, and censorship of these statues? This is gonna move on to churches, right? They're not afraid to invade the sacred space of churches. For example, I think that's how I'm seeing it. I'm not seeing it literally like they're toppling statues. They're gonna be toppling churches next. I'm seeing it as more metaphorically, they're not going to stop at this level of censorship. They're going to move on to even our own sacred spaces. It's kind of like making conservatives more afraid, but it's not it's not incredulous at the same time. Yeah, maybe it's extreme language, maybe it's yeah, it's if you look at it literally, I can see why it's ridiculous. If you look at it metaphorically, it makes a lot of sense. So I guess it comes down to our disagreement, comes down to us interpreting the original post, in differently.
It's my girlfriend.
Yeah. Yeah.
She's
If you
chicken
want,
wait.
we can,
No, she can wait.
okay.
Sorry about the interruption.
No, no, it's okay. It's okay. All good. So yeah, I'm glad we could clarify this. Um, and yeah, I mean,
But I
that.
don't take. But wait a second.
uh,
I take back calling you an animal, but but I don't take back my decorum of calling anyone that would admit that a fallacy of composition is perfectly fine, an animal, and that I
Sure.
can't talk
But
to
you
that
do
person.
agree that I didn't actually mean it, even if we
I'm agreeing that
misinterpreted.
I'm
Okay,
agreeing
sure,
that you didn't actually mean it, but I'm
sure.
not. But I so I'm taking back the comment in respect to you, but I'm not
Fair
taking
enough.
back
Yeah,
my decorum at doing that because I can't discuss things with people that think fallacies are okay. It just isn't.
yeah.
It's impossible.
Sure, sure. I agree. I don't think fallacies are okay. Um, that said, it still depends, right? Like, say, slippery slopes could be permissible in certain cases. Like right now, even if I took your original post as completely metaphorical, like if they're censoring your speech and statues now, how long until they start censoring pastors at churches, right? If I look at it metaphorically like that, it is a slippery slope argument, but at the same time, it's not, like it's not incredulous. I can see that happening.
Okay,
You see what I'm
that
saying? Like
isn't actually what you're talking about. Is not a slippery slope.
it's not okay.
No, a slippery slope would be technically if I took a position
Hmm.
and you disagree with my position on its face
Hmm.
because you thought that position led to this. So
Okay,
if you're
okay,
so
fine.
if you're saying that we disagree with them statuing statues because we are
Hmm.
saying that that could lead to them statuing
Okay, okay,
toppling
fair enough.
churches, that would be a slippery slope. But you're disagreeing with them toppling statues for a different reason than that.
Sure, sure, sure.
So
Okay,
that's not
fair
your
enough.
position. Is that, well, if you let them topple statues, next thing you know they'll be toppling churches. You
Yeah.
disagree with them toppling statues because of X, Y, and Z, not because of that.
Yep. Okay.
So
Yeah,
like
yeah, fair
saying,
enough.
like if we let people hunt deer, the next thing they'll hunt people is a slippery slope.
Yeah, yeah. Fair enough. Okay, okay. Sure. But yeah, I agree with what you said. Like, yeah, like people who think fallacies are okay, yeah, they shouldn't be debating. You're right. It's not worth debating them. And I hope I don't do that. Like, I try to be careful with what I'm, like what my argument is in in general. So yeah, like I'm glad we cleared that out. Was there anything else you wanted to say, or
No, sir. We've been about an hour. I thought it
okay?
was a pleasant discussion, and I
Yeah, yeah,
enjoyed talking to you.
yeah. You as well, man. I'm glad we finally got to meet on screen. So like what's going on with the weekly discussion thing?
Well, I'm waiting for others to talk about times they can do it.
Hmm.
I
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think it's hard to do the format I want to do, the casual kind of thing with two people. It's just kind of hard because you feel when it's just two people, then they both kind of feel like they gotta bear the whole thing, and
Wait, is it come again? Your voice got muffled.
when you have only
Yeah,
two, it kind of
yeah.
feels like they have to kind of bear the whole thing, and like person
Hmm.
can't kind of take a time out and let the other people talk for a minute.
Yeah,
So in a more casual sense, it's better to have three or four.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I agree. I agree.
So I'm trying to make, in the last two times we did it, it was just me and Julian,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and
Yeah, that was my bad, man. Like uh uh I know like yeah, the second time around I totally forgot about it. I wasn't online all day, and by the time I see, but definitely the next time you do it, I'm gonna make my schedule free because I'm on break right now. I just work during the day, like at home, so I'm
but I
free.
never negotiated with the other people about the time.
Hmm.
So I
So
mean, I said 8 o'clock Wednesday. That's when we're doing it. But if I had more of a talk with the others about a time that works better
mhm.
for them, then maybe we could arrange a little better. And
Sure.
maybe we can get Nelson on here, who a little more
Yeah,
partisan Republican. That
yeah, yeah.
that may be a little more interesting. Okay,
Sure.
well, I had a
Yeah.
nice time
All right.
talking with you, and I
Yes,
and I apologize after the
oh no,
fact
it's
for
okay.
any
I'm glad.
misunderstandings.
I'm glad. Like I do respect this about you. Like I've always like even if we've had disagreements, I've always seen you as arguing in good faith. And I really respect that. Like because it's like because I feel like you are searching for the truth. Like and I hope I come across as that way as well. Obviously, we seem biased in each other's perspectives, like very much so, in many topics, right? But like at the end, I just hope that I do look for the truth, and if you show me that I'm wrong somewhere, um, I'll definitely admit it. Like I can admit it and move on.
All
So
right, I would say the same thing
yeah,
to Steve. How about you yourself?
I appreciate that, man. Okay,
All right, I had a
all
very
right.
nice time, and I'd like to talk to you again in the future. I don't know the time we're going to arrange, but it'll be sometime during the week. I can't do this on the weekend, but
Yeah, 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 that's fine. Okay,
be
sounds
sometime
good,
during.
man.
All right, had a
Mhm.
good
All right,
time.
you
Have a
as
good
well.
night.
Okay, you as well. Good night.